For me, Zen was, and I suppose still is, a gateway into what it is to be fully present with the moment and to find a way to be witness to the moment without being sucked into the moment. Mount Tremper, beautiful place. I was there when the founder was still alive. It felt like home in a sense. The teaching felt like home. Even the initiation process to becoming a formal student there, I felt like home.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Fiveson. And today I am really excited to have Dr. Ronen Goddard, a renowned expert in personal development, transformation, and coaching. And he's also got a significant background in mindfulness as well. In this podcast, we're going to explore the vast experiential knowledge, unique insights, and transformative experiences of Dr. Goddard, and it spans several decades. I've known Tom quite a while. He's going by the name of Ronen now, and he can tell us a little bit about that because I think it really talks to his story from early life, his journey of self-discovery, transformation, and personal growth. And we're going to explore his unique approach to integrating diverse fields of study, learning, and practice, which he's curated over a number of years from world-class teachers. We're going to discuss his experiences and transformative journeys from head to body to slippery to authentic and prepackaged spirituality to an authentic and unique path. Dr. Goddard shares his wisdom, his insights, and practical tips on cultivating deeper awareness, mindfulness, and intention in this podcast. We're going to explore how mindfulness practices can help us navigate the complexities of modern life and create deeper meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in our personal and professional relationships. So join us as we dive deep into the mindfulness experience and explore what it means to live a life of intention, awareness, and authenticity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ronen Goddard. All right. Ronen, Dr. Tom. Hey. Welcome, man. I'm so glad to have you here.
It's been way too long since we last spoke, Keith.
I am so glad, man. How are you doing?
Doing great. Best time of my life.
Best time of your, well, wait a second. You and I are the same age. So it's the best time of my life as well. It really is. It's amazing when you get that wake up call that says you don't have to do, you can just be who you are.
Yeah. It took a while for me at least. And now I get to be who I've always wanted to be. And it's pretty sweet.
That's incredible. So you've had an incredible journey of self-discovery and transformation. I know you through several iterations. I think I know you for probably about close to 30 years, maybe. You know, it's like close to 30 years, and you are definitely one of my guru go-to people. Well, it's true. It's very true. You know, I seek inspiration from you. Can you share a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to, sort of go off on a journey of self-discovery? Because you've had your own company, you've been involved in running retreats, you've been involved in this whole area of consciousness. Maybe you can share your whole life in one or two sentences. How's that work?
Oh, golly, share my whole life in one or two sentences.
Oh, God, forgive me. I'm sorry. Yeah, go for it.
There's an old songwriter's trick that rather than try to, I think we would translate this way, rather than share your whole life in one or two sentences, share one or two sentences and see if you can see your whole life reflected in it. So it's a little easier to get at it through starting small.
Let's go for it. Do it.
So I think it's fair to say that I've been trying to figure out what was going on at the largest scale since I was about 11. I won't go into the details of that story, but I had this a waking up moment facilitated by my wonderful mother, in which I realized that there was a lot more to God, or the biggest possible concept I could come up with, than what was being handed out in Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
And once that revelation came along, then everything started to unravel. It wasn't long, probably 8-9 years, before I discovered Zen.
Mm-hmm.
And I dove deeply into meditation. What I loved about Zen was that it was not about dogma, which at 11 I realized was probably not the life for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I dove deeply into Zen meditation, and
at 11. So you were 11 years old when you started?
Oh no, about 20. About 11. About 11 is when I kind of
So fast forward from 11 to 20.
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of wandered around in the wilderness, as it were. Once the thread of dogma got pulled and the sweater unraveled, and then I found myself kind of landing on mindfulness as through the lens of Japanese Zen. And I just went down that path for decades, and with other important influences along the way from other traditions. But at my core, I really was a practitioner of Zen for probably until I was about 55. So for a good 30-35 years, that's how I kind of thought about myself. And there was something refreshing about a tradition that paid a whole lot more attention to just sitting and being with reality than on a particular set of beliefs I had to adopt and swear to and chant. With the chants we chanted were hardly dogmatic.
Yeah, I mean, so Zen is, everyone kind of, uses Zen sort of like, you're very Zen, or you're very. So what are we talking about with Zen? Because I know it is just a sense of presence, a sense of being, a sense of being content with, or accepting with what is, and sort of going with the flow is, certainly Alan Watts in his famous book, The Watercourse Way, sort of talks about, the woo-wee, the understanding and feeling the energy of it. What's your definition of what Zen is?
Well, for me, Zen was, and I suppose still is, a gateway into what it is to be fully present with the moment, and to find a way to be witness to the moment without being sucked into the moment, or sucked into my emotional reaction to the moment. At least that's how it showed up for me. I studied after years of kind of doing self-taught Zen, read this book and that book, and my library is full of books about Zen practice. I stumbled across a monastery in the Catskill Mountains called Zen Mountain Monastery.
Oh yeah, know it well. Yeah, love that place. Yeah.
Mount Tremper, beautiful place. I was there when the founder was still alive, Daido Roshi, and studied there for about 5 years, not in residence, but I would go there regularly, and had a relationship with Shugen Sensei, who I believe is still a teacher there. And it felt like home in a sense. The teaching felt like home. The sitting felt like home. Even the discomfort, even the initiation process to becoming a formal student there, which was really quite intense for me, felt like home. It was like, oh yeah, this is why I came here, is to sit in this cold cabin up on the side of a mountain with about 3 other students, would-be students, until my feet went numb, and then standing up and walking out until walking around in the woods until my feet were no longer numb, and then coming back in and sitting some more. It was,
Wait a second, Tom. This does not sound very inviting to people who are listening right now. Come on now.
yeah.
What is so like, okay, so like Zen, what's the invitation? I mean, why do that?
Oh, why do that?
Why get so numb in your feet, and why get so, why, as it sounds a little like deprivation.
Yeah, well, the good news is that it wasn't deprivation. It was, and I have since learned I don't have to numb my feet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
That was a feature of my youth and enthusiasm and foolishness.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly not necessary. And in fact, my Zafu is up on the shelf up here, seldom used. I do all my meditation in a quite comfortable chair in the morning, and
Right.
so that was just part of my learning process. I kind of thought that's what had to be done. And I was, in retrospect, I kind of bought into a hidden, not taught dogma
Mm-hmm.
that I don't need to buy into anymore. That's fallen away.
Hmm. So, I mean, I always say, we're human beings, we're not human doings. And
Yeah.
I think what I get from Zen, certainly from Zen practice or Zen philosophy, is there's everything in the nothing. There is a sense of, there's the space in between the raindrops. There's the silence underneath the sound. There is, this other polarity that gives rise to the polarity that you may be paying attention to, but there is this other polarity that underlies it. It's not always what people say. It's sort of like, what is the undercurrent that gives rise to that wave?
Right.
And that's what I've gotten from Zen, is the ability to kind of like see underneath the surface as to what is being said, not the way people are saying it.
Yeah, and I think that's what drew me. And in retrospect, I think that's what drew me in. I wouldn't have said so at the time in my
Mm-hmm.
20s as I was first diving into
Mm-hmm.
meditation. But in retrospect, that's what I was yearning for, is a shift from being a human doer to a human being. And, here I am at 68 and just now starting to get really clear on how addictive to doing
Mm-hmm.
I have been, and have been really since I remember anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was I grew up in a culture of achievement, a family of achievement where you get the girl by getting another doctorate. I mean, it was and striving and focused, and I would call line energy, where you go out and you go do something.
Right.
And that's, you make something of yourself, you do something. And so much so in my enculturation and maybe even a part of my nature, I don't know, that felt like I've had to do in order to be, even though my head decades ago heard the teaching that you start with be, then you do, and then you get to have. But I don't think I bought into that until relatively recent in my the development of my practice.
Wow. So, you've really, I mean, to that point of doing, you've done a lot, haven't you? You ran your own company, you've been a lawyer, you've gotten involved in running retreats. What are some of the things that you've done? And, in terms of those things, what are, maybe some of the highlights of things that you've really enjoyed doing in your life? I mean, obviously here you are, you're 68, as you say, and you feel like you don't have to do anymore. But looking back, I mean, and looking at where you're at right now, do you have a sense of that? I mean, I'd like to flesh out your background a little bit more so people know that you're not just a friend of mine, but you're someone who's, really well accomplished.
Well, yeah. Well, I decided I wanted to be at the ripe old age of 8. I decided I wanted to be a member of the U.S. Congress. I think there was a field trip. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time, and there was a field trip to the House of Representatives, and I sat down in a seat and I said, yeah, this is who I want to be. Someone who sits in this seat.
How did that? Now, you weren't in Congress, were you?
I know, but that's what I
Oh,
decided at 8
God,
that I
thank God.
wanted to
Otherwise,
be.
you may not be on the show.
No, no, no. At 8, I decided that's who I wanted to
Right,
be.
okay.
And
All
so
right.
then the next 25 years, every step I took educationally and professionally was single-minded with that 8-year-old's dream in mind. That
Mm-hmm.
meant going to law school, because when I sat down in 1963 in that seat in the House of Representatives, most of the people in Congress were lawyers. I thought, well, so I'll be a lawyer. Had no particular interest in being a lawyer, but I wanted to be a congressman, so that's what I did as a prerequisite, at least in my young mind. And so I did that, and then my plan was to work as a lawyer for no more than 5 years, and then get into politics, and then from there get some experience with that, and then run for office. So after 2 years as a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
I got hired by the governor of Arizona, Bruce Babbitt, and I
Mm-hmm.
did almost 2 years with him, and that was great. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was just great. He was great. The people I worked with were great. The work I was doing there was a variety of wonderful topics I was able to tackle, both environmental and dealing with how the justice system and schools are not well adapted to handle the troubles of teenagers, all sorts of wonderful topics that I felt like, yeah, we're doing good in the world. And then my career wandered through public policy for a few more years. I set my own consulting firm, political consulting firm, and did that for a couple of years. And then I ran for office. I ran for Pima County Supervisor in
Oh,
Tucson,
really?
Arizona.
Wow. Oh, wow. I didn't
And
know
it
that,
was
Tom. Wow.
1988. And I got my butt kicked
Uh-huh.
by a guy who had been a Republican senator at the state level for 5 terms. And we ran a very civil campaign. That's when such things actually happened. I actually liked the guy. He was a moderate Republican, and I was a moderate Democrat. We had civil debates about reasonable issues, and there was no culture war at all. It was about, do we do comprehensive planning? How do we do comprehensive planning for the metropolitan area of Tucson? Really, how do we deal with water rights? Great stuff. I enjoyed that piece of the running for office, but then after a few years in it, I realized, oh, it's the money that's the problem. I got to see that when I worked for the governor. I got to see, even with very high-minded individuals, it seemed to be improper role of money in the way things were done in the best possible administration. And I could only imagine lesser humans than the ones I was involved
And this
with.
is back in the 80s, right? Yeah. When greed
it
was
was in
good.
the early to mid 80s is when I was doing that politics.
Yeah.
And then, so I kind of gave up on the dream of being an elected official. I didn't like raising money from my friends when I ran for office myself. It was like, oh, this is awful.
Right. Yeah, but money makes the world go round. Money makes the world go round. A mark, a fin, what is it? A mark, a fin, a Dutch or a pound or something like that.
Oh yeah, money. I can just hear Joel Grey singing it
That's
now.
right. Yeah.
Right. So I wandered around aimlessly for a while, and then I found human development training, no longer in business, called LifeSpring. And I did all of those trainings because that was the first time I'd ever.
That was like a spin-off of Landmark Forum, or
well, it was like first cousin. They kind of grew up together.
Right? Yeah,
Est and
Est. Yeah.
Est and LifeSpring kind of grew up together, and then LifeSpring kind of fizzled out as LifeSpring. There's still a bunch of LifeSpring trainers out there doing LifeSpring trainings, but they don't call it that anymore. The business is no longer there. Right. But yeah, Est is. I never did Est or Landmark or Forum, but the folks I know who've done both said they're very, very similar, and some of the processes are even similar. Outside of Zen, it was the first time that experiential learning was at the foreground. And I loved it. I thought, oh, experiential learning. This is astonishing. And at first I thought, well, I'll just be a LifeSpring trainer. And I started to explore what that might look like. And I backed away from that as soon as I looked at the life of LifeSpring trainers. because they were on the road 3 weeks out of every 4. And I had 2 young boys at home, and a beautiful wife. And I decided, no, this is not a good time in my life to be out of town 3 out of 4 weeks. So I got to rethinking my life and said, well, maybe I could do this sort of work elsewhere, maybe in organizations. And so I went back to school. I decided to become a psychologist. So I went back to school and got a doctorate in psychology with an idea that I would work with organizations. And, what's the Yiddish expression? Man tracht, Gott lacht. Man plans, God laughs. Right. And so my life took some interesting detours. I became a general counsel and vice president of a health plan. And then I became the chief operating officer and general counsel of a healthcare accreditation company. And then I started my own healthcare consulting firm, all at the same time that I discovered a place that you know well, Shalom Mountain, a retreat center in the Catskill Mountains, where you and I met. And that was like LifeSpring in that it was body focused, but it seemed much deeper. Much deeper, and even had the potential to access transpersonal realms, realms beyond my personal self.
Yeah. So let me ask you. Let's stop there for a moment. So you've got this really wonderful analytical background that really starts out with being a lawyer, really discerning and being able to like dive deep and do the research and really look at the law and what the validity of arguments might be one way or the other, measuring both, but yet seeing both sides of the argument, and then weighing whatever it might be. But you bring that into the world, and then you start on your path. You do this Zen work, you incorporate that into your work, your sense of presence, and you recognize that there's something missing. And you do this work with LifeSpring, you start to look at your life, and you start to go ahead and shift your attention into psychology, into a whole other area of your life, if you will. And now you're talking about Shalom. I often struggle to go ahead and explain the Shalom process. And what I normally do is I say, well, it's a combination of core energetics, psychodrama, and transpersonal work using holotropic breath work and a lot of other modalities in terms of being seen, heard, recognized in a very safe container for the community. Now, there is a lot there to unpack. How would you describe it?
It took a long time before I had any language for what it was at all. But I think I've got at least one way of describing it. And it may be a whole paragraph, so bear with me.
Go ahead.
Each of us, each human, has experienced very often as children under 7, and very often after that, but I think more intensely when we're young and still in this kind of nascent development, sometimes in the womb.
Vitro.
The things that are too much to process. They're overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be abuse, but it often for too many people it is.
It could be implicit or explicit trauma.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't even have to be explicit trauma. I had a relatively, by all standards, trauma-free life, except for being a little too skinny and a little too small and a little young for my grade and kind of the object of a lot of bullies' attention. But, nothing.
Hey, come on now. Come on. You're good. You're good here.
Yeah. No, I had a great life, a great childhood, but I knew I had these kind of experiences, or I know now that I had these experiences that were too much for me to process in the moment. And what we tend to do is to kind of say, I'm not going to process that now unconsciously. And we just stuff it in our subconscious, which is to say we stuff it in our bodies. In this modality that you're describing at Shalom and core energetics,
the body keeps store.
The body keeps the score, as the book title says. And so what Shalom and core energetics and other similar modalities are attempting to do is, through breath and movement and some but not much conversation, find those blocks that make our presumably whole selves into little multi-chambered rooms with walls all over the place, isolating parts of us, and to find those walls, and with breath, energy, movement, and some conversation, hopefully soften and maybe even dissolve those walls. So the
really,
Shalom process does that in community.
So really, in that process, to be able to go ahead and bring those parts, those exiled parts, into the conversation or into the room, to go ahead and let them be seen, let them be heard, let them be recognized, and in some cases, let them be examined through the process of psychodrama, reenactment, using emotional literacy as a way to go ahead and reset, reframe, reboot our experience, so that we can go ahead and go into the world kinder, nicer, gentler people that love ourselves more than perhaps we did going into it.
Right. And love is right at the heart of it. Love and intimacy, interestingly, are at the heart of it. One of my teachers, Mark Goffney, has put it this way. When I asked him to talk to me about the Shalom process, I described it to him in detail. Here's what we do Thursday night. Here's what we do Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning. I walked him through it, and he said, well, it strikes me that each human has a crisis of intimacy, a unique crisis of intimacy, where we are separated in a unique way from the whole, from the all that is, whatever name you want to give to that, from the all that is, including our own bodies. And the Shalom process is designed to help to mend that rift in intimacy by simply flooding the participants in intimacy. And by intimacy, I don't mean rolling in the hay. I mean encountering in an intimate way who I am, what my body is, what I'm feeling in my body and my emotions, and using that as a doorway to intimacy with other beings and to intimacy with the all that is.
Into me see, to be seen, heard, and recognized as you are, and for whatever your story is. So let me ask you, you've got these diverse fields of study. You had your own company, you worked with individuals, and you're actually going back to Shalom, doing retreats now as well still, and you work with people on an individual level. So my question is from your view, looking back at this experience and being present with your sense of presencing, your sense of like being present with people, what are well, let me ask you first, what do you think about, how do you integrate these diverse fields of study and practice to create an integral approach to personal development?
I would say a few years ago, I would have had a very intellectual answer for that. I'd probably cite Ken Wilber and weave in all sorts of integral theory in there. And how do I integrate it now is that anymore I've just absorbed it so much that I now am simply present with the people I work with. In core energetics, that, there are these 5 characterological structures that date back to Wilhelm Reich and have been filtered through his psychological descendants in bioenergetics and core energetics. But what they say even in core is to learn the 5 characterological structures that people grapple with and then forget them and just be with your client. And I'd say that is truer and truer for me. I mean, you and I both know some of the same leaders at Shalom. And when I was first in training to lead retreats at Shalom Mountain, I thought, wow, Lawrence must have a bag of tricks. And how do I develop that intellectual expertise to know how, when presented with this kind of situation and with a retreatant, to do that particular technique and then to play that song at the end of that experience. And then what I've come to know with experience is that I need to let go of all of that in order to be fully present and let the mere presence with the individual or the room or with myself inform what is next in a spontaneity that I only dreamed of having access to when I first started reading about spontaneous action in the Zen texts that I was studying in my 20s. I didn't even understand acting spontaneously as I do now 40 years ago. And so now my clients show up or my retreatants show up, and then I have a basic structure. I know we want to do some breathing, and I know we want to be present with each other, and there may be certain forms that come into play, but I hold all of them very, very lightly.
Mm-hmm. So there's something that you're saying that you're not saying, and it's sort of it's maybe sort of difficult to grasp for me, or maybe for the listeners, to kind of get to what it is that you're talking about, because to me it's sort of like trying to describe the wind. There's a sense here of intuiting, of being present to whatever the whispers are, whatever is coming up for you at the moment, and following that, like that muse. It sounds like it's not about the intellectual patterning and all the foundational work, I think, is there, but that's really sort of the river that really, or the river bed that really holds and supports the river, or the flow of the water, which is really in the presence of the relationship.
That's beautifully put, Keith. Right up there on the wall at Shalom, it says, more than anything else, we want to love and be loved. First principle of loving.
Mm-hmm.
Been up on the wall for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I start there with myself and with whoever walks in the door and whoever I encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And the corollaries to that are, more than anything else, we want to see and be seen, hear and be heard. And so all I do now is radically see as I can see, radically listen, and listen not just to the words, but to the music, to the whatever energy I feel is bouncing around the room.
Right. Now that is very different. That is very different than a clinical analyst, someone who is going into working with a client, perhaps a therapist, and within that context, sort of, coming up with a DSM analysis in terms of what's going on, in terms of, their case, and how do I bill this on my insurance, and what do I do, right?
You've just uttered my least favorite three-letter word, DSM. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Exactly.
It is, to me, I have, because as you've said, I've worked with organizations. I still am the titular head of a consulting firm in healthcare that works with some of the largest healthcare companies in the world.
Right.
So I know that system pretty well. And to me, the DSM is a tool of that system, not a tool of care. Not nearly as much. It's really about money. We're back to money, making the world go round. I think it's very helpful for insurance companies to figure out what they're going to pay for and how much they're going to pay.
Right.
A
But within the context of what you're talking about, I mean, it's a very different model, right? Because here you're not really relying on the clinical, on the analytical, on the classification of somebody's issue or somebody's break, if you will. You're really sort of looking at the individual, and you're kind of moving in a lot further. It reminds me of the work that I've been doing around psychedelics, because what happens with that individual is they go on a journey, right? And, I like to think about the work that we did at shalom as individuals going out on a journey, having a journey, and being able to go ahead and go deep, dive deep into the, into for the pearls, and really kind of come face to face with their shadow, and really come face to face with the darkness. But it's that individual that's doing the work. You're not walking or talking them through it. You're there, your presence for them, and you're really using, a therapeutic presence, and really kind of helping them to mirror, or helping them to see what it is that there is coming up for them if they want that guidance. And I'm wondering, from your experience upon, doing this work, and you continue to do that work with individuals, what your sense of this sort of hero's journey is, the mat work is, the psychedelic work is, as individuals sort of go into their mindfulness state, go into a state of being present for themselves, all of the parts of themselves. And, what is that about? Because there's, it's difficult work. It's not the analytical work. It's not the talk, show up and throw up, right?
Right. Well, and I think the reason it's difficult for so many of us is that we have not received much training or had much practice in radical presence with each other. We actually don't know much, or with ourselves. We don't know much about how to do that. And certainly it in my training, it has taken me a good long while to let go of what I thought I should know or thought I knew, and to be fully present in a moment. David White has a line in one of his poems that leave everything you know behind. Leave everything you know behind. And for somebody who spent decades under the model that I was going to shove a bunch of stuff in my head and then charge people to extract it from my head, it's a very different thing. In fact, my body has become a very different instrument than I thought it was. I spent years, decades, thinking that my body was primarily a very helpful way to nourish and move around the world my head, which contained the most important thing, my brain. And now I'm realizing that that story is wrong and, in a sense, crippling. That my consciousness resides throughout my body, and particularly in my belly, as the Taoists knew 2,500 years ago. And as the Zen practitioners have talked about, and as so many traditions have talked about, the mind that is in our bodies, and that's the mind that I try to tap into so much more all the time, not just in my work, but in my meditations. I used to spend a lot of time with my meditations focusing on this skull or what was going on inside of it, and now I pay a whole lot more attention to what's going on in my lower chakras, to use that system, and what I'm feeling in my body, and what I'm feeling with my body in the space around me.
So on a somatic level, I like to use the term, a feeling mind, thinking body. And that whole idea that, not only does the body keep the store, but if you ask the questions like, what's going on for me? Like just a simple question, where am I? You check in to see what condition your condition is in, right?
Right.
That whole concept of doing that. And what it sounds to me like the work that you're doing not only is a liftoff from this work at Shalom, the somatic work, the ability to go ahead and presence, to have this therapeutic presence for individuals, and to really kind of be a whisperer of sorts to help people to see their own experience, so that they can go ahead and own their story. It's incredibly powerful. How can, individuals use things like mindfulness practices to navigate some of the complexities of modern life and create some deeper meaning, maybe some purpose, some fulfillment? in their personal or their professional relationships. What do you think? Is there an opportunity to do that? And do you think that that is one of the keys, or are there others?
Well, that's one of the keys. Just this week, I was exploring with a client why she was having trouble accessing kind of an emotional. I was asking about emotional response and where she felt a particular emotion in her body. And it was clear from her answers that she didn't really have, or hadn't in a long time, had much access to it. She remembered having access to it in a different part of her life, but didn't have that access anymore. So we talked about meditation. She said, right, I used to do that. I used to do that. And so in that sense, mindfulness is really powerful for some people to get reconnected, remember, reassemble our members with our emotions and with our bodies. We stress so much our thoughts and the jibber jabber that goes on inside our heads, and mindfulness helps to quiet that jibber jabber so that we can feel our emotions, feel that those emotions connections to our body, and in doing that open up a whole world of connection to what we're here on the planet for, who I want to be with, how I want to be with that person over there. Because if I can connect to my emotions through, among other practices, mindfulness and meditation, then I believe that I will have a greater capacity to be in contact with the reality of the person I'm sitting across from. Like, who are they really? And not get caught up into a back and forth between two minds jabbering at themselves and each other, for all sorts of reasons, self-affirmation, achievement, impressing you with what I know, all of that stuff. It's really tuning in, using this as this body as an instrument to help tune into your being as an instrument, and set aside, at least for a moment, the thinking brain, the doing brain, and actually be with. Jerry Judd, the founder, one of the co-founders of Shalom Mountain, once took me aside when he was a young man of about 93. He lived to be just shy of 100. He was a young man of 93. He said, I want to give you a gift, my friend. Gift is the word with. And that gift has been working me for the last decade. What is it to truly be with somebody? And it cannot be done, in my view, by thinking about being with or by talking about being with. There's a withness that requires the engagement and the relaxation of all that thinking and talking, internal and external, and allowing the withness to emerge in the energetic space of my own body and the space between us.
Well, that's part of the challenge, I think, and I really appreciate that answer. I think that's part of the challenge of where we're at, with the Zoom culture. I mean, I was with a client earlier today myself, and, I became aware, he was talking about his therapist, another therapist he's working with, and he said, and he shared something with me, and he said, well, you're the only person I've shared this with. And I said, well, really? And he said, yeah, well, the other therapist I'm working with, I see them on Zoom. I've been talking to them a lot longer, but, I just don't have a connection, and there's something I talk about the smell. It's a smell. It's a, you can smell it. You can feel it. It's a spirit, and I use breath. The root word for breath is spir in Latin. I use that word as in spirit, as in inspire, as in aspire, as in respire, as in perspire, as in expire. It's within the, or a conspire, which is actually a good word, right? Within the context of sharing. Do you see emotional intelligence playing a role in?
I'm in the middle of a thunderstorm here in North Carolina,
Oh, okay. All right. So,
and our
uh-huh.
internet connection is unstable. Apparently, this is a lively topic.
Uh,
I, I don't know if you got that, but
did you lose half of my conversation?
about the last 10 seconds, there's this wild thunderstorm going on outside here, and the little sign, your internet connection is unstable, just as you're talking about the limitations of Zoom.
Exactly.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's totally perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, that whole idea of us sharing and conspiring, and I use that root word of breath as spear, as in inspire or aspire, expire, and conspire. I mean, conspiring is something that people do. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that they can breathe and they can feel and they can smell what's going on for other folks. You can walk into a room after an argument and you can smell and feel the negative energy in the room. You can it's just a part of it. And my follow-up to that was, what role do you think emotional intelligence plays within the construct of, like having that? And are we being dumbed down in some way, like with Zoom and technology, and just being dumbed down to the point that, we're just relying like on AI, on artificial intelligence. So I think there's this emotional intelligence and the aspect of being able to create, not only good leaders, but, personal and professional success in terms of building strong relationships.
It's so wonderful that you're talking about emotional intelligence in this context. When I was in graduate school for psychology, I wrote a major, or one of the larger questions on my comprehensive exam was about emotional intelligence. And it was a take-home exam, a week-long take-home exam, and I was able to dive deeply into the research of Salovey and Meyer and Caruso, who kind of came up with the modern use of the term.
Yeah, out of Yale. I did that program as well.
Yeah. I studied with Caruso and
David Caruso, beautiful man. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic stuff. And I love what they brought to that field. And again, they're just because they're in that model of testing. They came up with their own scale of one of probably a half a dozen emotional intelligence scales. They had to kind of operationalize what they were talking about. Useful in the world of Western science, but again, like the core energetics characterological structures or any of these other models, Ken Wilber's integral theory model, at a certain point, we need to let go of the model and just be with each other. Now, what I think the value of emotional intelligence research has done is it's exposed us to the multiple dimensionality of emotional intelligence. There's a lot to it, as you learned in your training and I learned in mine. Can I read my own emotions? Can I read your emotions? Can I detect all sorts of dimensions to it? And so it really is like a finger pointing at the moon, to use the old Buddhist expression, that it's great to gesture in that direction. There's much to be learned in that gesture. But again, we have to take the model, learn it, and then let it go. Because it really is about emotional intelligence. Now, how it applies in the in-person versus Zoom, it's kind of interesting to me. To me, it's all about intimacy. And oddly enough, there is a way that being on Zoom is in some ways more intimate and in some ways much less intimate. It's more intimate in that we seldom have conversations with people where they're just, their face is right in front of us for an hour. Right. It just doesn't, real life in-person interaction doesn't work that way. So in a sense, and very often it's a closer view than we would get sitting across the room from a friend and chatting. Listening to music and all, being aware of the ambient factors of the room we're in, but we're just like right here. So in that sense, there's more intimacy. And I've been able to do an awful lot of good work, as I know you have, in this medium. But then I've now recently moved to North Carolina, and I've started to explore workspaces where I can work with my local clients in person. And oh, what a joy and relief that is to actually be able to touch each other. Because there's a part of my work that, of course, with consent, can involve touch. There's so much information. Just when I'm facilitating breath, to put my hand on my client's belly, there's so much information there that is like, oh, that's going on. I mean, you've seen this in shalom retreats that are very often a part of the breathing facilitation at the beginning of a piece of individual work at shalom involves the retreat leader actually lying down heart to heart across the body of the participant for at least a little while and facilitating breathing. You can actually, if you do that enough, you can start to feel that, as you put it, the smell. You can actually start to detect the smell, the emotional fragrance of the other person. And that's certainly, I love working in that in-person space, and hope that right now it's more like 80% online and 20% in person. It's my aspiration to move more and more to in-person, because it's a richer field in which to play. Now, Zoom, of course, has wonderful advantages. There folks who have social anxiety, it's a safer place for them. And so, I have a client who is probably going to be more comfortable with this than ever getting together with me in person, and that's great. I can work with people anywhere in the world, and do great work, as I know you do. And so I'm not dissing Zoom, but it's a very different kind of intimacy, with advantages on both sides and disadvantages on both sides.
Yeah, I think, to that point, I think it's allowed us to go ahead and reach more people, and allowed more people to show up, and allowed more people to get together without the sort of clumsiness or the social awkwardness, and yet at the same point, it because of the intensity, sometimes it doesn't necessarily get all of the attention, that it might get if you were in a retreat with someone who was, emotionally having a challenging time and needs to go ahead and be seen, be heard, be recognized, and, have something come out of them that may not come out of them because of the buffer, if you will, that Zoom holds. So, so I thought it was important, Ronen, to see, I'm adopting the name. I'm good.
Everybody who's known me for more than 10 years, as you do, gets a pass on the Ronen Tom split.
Yeah.
I can go either way on that.
So I don't want it to be the last part of it, but you did adopt this new name, because I know you as Tom Goddard, and you've now got this new name, Ronen. And it's new to me, but you told me earlier that you've had this name for quite a while. It's a spiritual name. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, it's Hebrew for song, or in the hyperbolic words of one of my teachers, Mark Goffney, thunderous song of God. I just think song is plenty. I grew up the child of people who met in music school, and a musician myself, and who has born 2 children who are professional musicians. And so, but there's as I've moved into this part of my life where I'm moving away from selling my brain, which is what I've done for almost half a century, to really more engaging with my heart. Song seems to more appropriately fit who I have evolved into.
Beautiful. I love that. It's certainly, years ago I was given the name by Swami Satchidananda of Shunya, and it's really short for Shunyata. And of course I got this name. I was so proud. I got the name, and like, oh, it's nice. It's Shunya. And I said, well, what does it mean? And they said, well, it's actually short for Shunyata. And I said, well, what's that mean? And they said, well, it really means 0, nothing. And I was like, huh? So you've got this beautiful song and I've got nothing. All right. So, I'm like in awe of that explanation. And, I've since come to really, really appreciate the name, because it really is, about having a presence, or having a sense of coming back to the moment, because, at the end of the day, it's all nothing, and it's meaningless, and it's meaningless that it's meaningless. So, yeah.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I've come to have a very sweet appreciation for emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
That I because I also was deep in the world of emptiness in my years as a Zen practitioner. It was like, oh, I don't know that I like the feeling of this. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking some solace, Keith, in the findings of quantum physics, or at least the theories of quantum physics, who tell us that even in the emptiest vacuum of space, we have this quantum field that is pure potential, in and out of which quarks pop into existence and then are reabsorbed back into this apparent vacuum. And that serves for me as a metaphor for the fullness of emptiness. And so I have finally befriended this term that has tormented me for decades, this emptiness. So I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Emptiness.
I love that. I love that. So as we sort of wrap it up over here, Ronen, Tom, Dr. Goddard, I'm wondering, where do you think we're going from the standpoint of, well, let me ask you, if someone is just listening to this for the first time and they want to find out more about how to go ahead and have, personal experiences, or deal with their trauma or presence, what's going on, or be seen, be heard, or be recognized, a lot of the things that we've talked about here, what would you say to them in terms of maybe places they could go to, maybe even on your website, maybe some other places that they might, what would your advice be for them? Because obviously, we've just taken, close to an hour here, and, there's only so much you can get out of, a lifetime in an hour. But I'm just wondering how people can go ahead and, continue on with their journey, given our conversation.
Well, certainly the places that we've mentioned, Shalom Mountain is, if you're anywhere, they can get to the Catskill Mountains, a beautiful place to do this kind of work, or at least to start this kind of work. Individual, I think working with an individual practitioner who deals in any of the great somatic-oriented modalities like core energetics or bioenergetics or somatic experience or Hakomi. All of these are getting at basically the same kind of orientation. The reason I like core energetics is that it is kind of bioenergetics plus a recognition that there's a spiritual dimension to humanity. That's why I've gone into that direction in my work. integralbecoming.com is my website, and if anybody wants to just chat about what resources they might be able to find that are close to them, I'm happy to at no charge have that kind of conversation, or talk about the work that I do with my clients remotely or in person. There are all sorts of wonderful books that really point at this. New Self, New World is one. I love Michael Singer's most recent book, Living Untethered. It's his third book, and my favorite of the three he's written. And many, many others have influenced me over the years that kind of point at this, but to not get caught up in thinking you can teach it with your brain. It's practice, practice, practice. It's like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice, practice, practice. Take up a practice, or examine. My own sense, Keith, is that everybody in the world has a practice, and one might even call it a spiritual practice. And even the atheists, all you have to do is ask, how do you spend your time? What do you do with your body? What do you care about? How do you know what's true? And you can reveal a whole, what I would call a spiritual world, even for those who don't recognize it that way. And I think if people just examine, well, how do I spend my time? How do I eat? What do I eat? Where do I put my attention through most of the day? That's probably your practice.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, move a muscle, change a thought. Go ahead and check out some of the resources that Ronen Goddard has put together, Dr. Goddard. And I think that, you're a beautiful man, Tom, and I really deeply appreciate our friendship. I appreciate you being here. And there's so much more to unpack, and I hope we can do that going forward. Thank you.
I love it, Keith. I consider you a dear friend and have always been inspired by you, and have really been loving your podcast since you put it out. About 64 episodes now so far. This is it's a real contribution to the world, and I'm so delighted that you're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We have other exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. For more mindfulness tips and tricks, visit our website at workmindfulness.com. Thanks again for being a part of the Mindfulness Experience. This is Keith Fiveson.